Hello everyone. So today we are back for one of more topic of administrative unit. Okay. So we will understand what are administrative unit, how we can be able to create the administrative unit, what are the details that is being required, types, features, configurations, management, best practices and troubleshooting. So you will have a complete guide. This is not a long guide. This is just a basic steps or basic details that we have covered over in Azure Administrative Unit. Okay, so moving forward. So this is just a basic introduction. What is Administrative Unit and how did it work? So basically, Administrative Unit is in Microsoft Entra ID is a container resource for users, group, and devices that enables organizations to implement least privilege principles. AU helps to ensure that administrators only have the access to the resources necessary for their job functions and enhancing security or the compliance. So basically an administrative unit is a container for users, groups, device that will enable that will give the access to that particular container only. For example, if a user has been there who has the access to entire tenant itself. For example, this is our tenant. Okay, I will create one basic diagram so you can be able to understand. Okay, so this is our tenant. Okay, here we have one GA which will have an access to entire tenant, right? Then we will create administrative unit. For example, this is the one container, this is another container. In this container we could have users, devices and groups. Okay, this is the third container. So this GA, if these are the normal AUs, then this GA will have access to these all three. Okay, but we have one more type of administrative unit, that is restricted administrative unit. We will check that out also out. If that is a restricted administrative unit, then this global administrator, who is the global administrator on the tenant, he could also not be able to have the access on this restricted. For example, this is the restricted administrative unit. Okay, and these are the normal administrative unit. Normal we will give as A. Okay, so these are the normal one. Then this GA can be able to access these both administrative unit and do some changes or additional of that group. But if this is a restricted one, the GA global administrator of the tenant could also not be able to perform any task under this administrative unit. So how it is, for example, this is the GA, so he can be, but for example you have to give a help desk, which is a help desk. So you can create an administrative unit, and in this administrative unit you can give an help desk administrative role. Okay, so for example we have created help desk administrative role HA. Okay, so this role will be applicable under this container only. All the user devices or the groups which will be added to this administrative unit, this help desk administrator will work for only this container. He can't be able to do anything on this tenant. He can't be able to do anything with this both administrative unit. He can only be able to access this particular administrative unit. Okay, for another administrative unit, for example this, if I have given user administrative role. Okay, here I have given user administrative role. So this user administrator can only be able to manage or access the users under this administrative unit. He can't be able to access this nor this, not the entire tenant. Okay, so this is the benefit of administrative unit. Basically, if you are using an administrative unit, you can be able to manage with the help of container. You can add users here, you can add groups here, you can add devices here. So for this particular container, you can be they can be able to edit it, or they can be able to manage it. They can't be able to find everything under tenant. They can't be able to manage other administrative unit also, only the particular administrative unit from where you have given the roles. And if it is a restricted one, then even GA, the global administrator of the tenant, okay, this GA can also not be able to access it, this administrative unit. Okay, the reason behind it is restricted. So only the person, for example, under this I have given a GA. then this GA can be able to manage only these users who are added to this administrative unit. Apart from this also, this GA can't be able to edit it. So this is the basic diagram or basic understanding of the administrative unit. Okay, hope this diagram help you out. I will when we will create or when we will go for a lab also, we can be able to understand what is administrative unit over there also. Okay, so what is the key benefit? As we have discussed, delegated administrations, like you can be able to modify to whom the user administrator or the global administrator or the group administrator over and which user it should work, right? Not within entire the intranet. Enhance security, yes, security will also be enhanced as you are giving the access for the particular container, not for an intra tenant. Okay, and organization structure, like you can create a multiple AU based on your departments, based on your business units, it could be, or based on the countries also. Like you have multiple countries, so you have India help desk, you have US help desk, you have Canada help desk, and based on that you can create a AUs, so they will get roles and they can be able to manage for their own country or their own BUs or their own departments it could be. Okay, so this is the key benefits. Now we will move forward. So now we have types of administrative units. So these are basically same, like the static administrative unit is a type of normal group. Like we can be able to manually manage the membership required for addition for adding or removal of the users. This will have and control over memberships, which user need to be added, which user need to be removed. A straightforward management approach, like you need to go to the administrative unit and you need to delete the add the users or delete the users. Well suited for a small organization. If you have a small organization, not the big organization, like you can be able to, your U team will be able to add or remove the users from there, so that will work over there. Okay, then we have dynamic administrative units, that is a type of group. Both is a type of group only, but we have the dynamic administrative unit also. Here we need to give the query, correct? So for example, this is the basic query that we have given: user department equal to marketing. So all the users whose department we will mention as a marketing will be able to they will be directly will be added to this administrative unit. So it will have an automated membership management, but you can't be have an control which user you need to add. Any user who is having the department as a marketing, or by mistake you have given as a department marketing, he will be able to add it to this dynamic membership administrative unit. Leverage users attribute means that is using the users attribute, department, job title, or whatever you need to give. That should be an attribute of the user, so that will be able, the user will be able to access it. And requires Microsoft Entra ID P1 license per man per member, means every member who we are going to add to this. For example, as this is a dynamic, right, for any of the dynamic rule in the group also you will require P1, in the AU also it will require P1. Okay, here we have a licensing. Static AU members required free license. If you need to create an static AU, means the manual AU, you will create a manual or administrative unit and you will manually go and add the users. That will not require any license. You can work for that as a free license also. But if you want a dynamic one, then you should be having P1 at least. P2 is a higher privilege, but you should be having P1 at least over there. Okay, moving forward, key features and capabilities, like already we have discussed, scoped role assignments, like uh, we have administrators grant specific roles with permissions limited to designated AU scope, like we have discussed. For the particular container, under that container we have given role. It could be user administrator, it could be help desk administrator, and that role will be there, that will be only applicable under this AU itself. They can't be able to access it apart from that particular AU. Like if I have created another AU under this, then they cannot be able to access the users which are there inside this AU. Okay, so enforce least privilege, correct, enforce security, and reduce the risk of the surface. So yep, it will give you another layer of security which has been there, as you are not assigning directly on the tenant basis, right? Scope roles contrast with tenant-wide assignment, limiting permissions to a specific subset of resources that we have discussed, right? And the tenant, if we are giving the role to the entire tenant, then it will have a large privileges or tenant-wise roles or tenant-wise access over the tenant. But if we have given a GA on that particular AU also, no, then he will be only able to access all the details of for that particular AU, not for the group. Okay. Supported object administrative unit contains and manages specific Microsoft Entra object groups, users, groups, both security and M365 and devices. So basically, from the GUI, you can't be able to add the service principals or applications. Okay, prestations or service principals from to this AU. But from PowerShell, for some of the application, it is possible. From the script, you can be able to add the enterprise applications to the AU. Okay. Moving forward, adding a group to the AU affects the group object itself, not individual member. Okay, so it is like a basic thing. If you are adding a group to the AU, it will affect the group, not the individual members. Okay, like for example, if you have not added individual users, then it will not affect the individual users. It will affect the individual group. Okay, this is the example. Like we have given the user administrator, manage user properties, reset password, block user sign-ins. So this is the roles that we have defined, and these roles you can give for the different AUs. For example, one AU we have created, it will give some other access. This will have group administrator, this will have help desk administrator, and the user behalf on these, only these role can be able to apply in this particular AUs, not for the all the AUs. Okay. So this will have the top key features that AU have. It will give you a granular control over administrative responsibilities and enhance the security and compliance. Moving forward, real world use case, this is a thing that we have created, like where you can be able to educational institution, large university you have, and multiple schools or multiple, each school has their own AU for local IT staff to manage the users. That can be a one approach. And the third thing is distributed enterprise, like you have a global organization and geographical teams. AU base can be country and specific boundaries, correct? Manage service providers. If you have multiple service provider, you can create AU and give the roles to there to manage inside the container. Means it's basically give the control over that particular container that you want, and that container will have the access inside their users and all. Okay. Regular environments, like if you have an organization, you need to restrict some frameworks and also you can create the restricted management AUs for sensitive accounts. Okay, so that cannot be able to accessible from the GA of the tenant also. For example, a GA of the tenant has been there, he also cannot be able to access the restricted AUs. Okay, so always keep in mind that. How it works, so basically it works with identity management boundaries. Administrative unit functions as logic identity management boundaries in Microsoft Entra ID, enabling granular delegation of administrative tasks. You can define the administrative tasks to the boundary itself. We have a flat hierarchy structure. Administrative unit operate as a flat structure within the Microsoft Entra ID tenant with no nesting capability. Sorry, not testing, nesting. That means, for example, we have created an AU, and then inside AU you are creating another AU. Then inside that AU you have added a group. That is not a capability of AU. Okay, inside a single AU you can add users, groups, and devices, but that will not include another AU inside that. Okay, that is not the capability of the AU. Comparison with other constructs, like for example, we have features, scope, administrative unit, Azure management groups, and the Azure groups resources. Okay, Microsoft Entra ID, these are the things that we can be able to manage. What is the scope, what is the purpose, what is the hierarchy, primary use case, and object type content. Azure management will contain subscription, this will contain user groups and devices, and Azure resource group can contain any Azure resources type itself. Okay, so this is the basic comparison that we have created. You can read it out if it has been needed. Okay, moving forward, configuration guide. So you can create a static AU by assigning to your Microsoft Admin Center. This is the basic thing that we have added. This we will check when we will move forward for the lab itself. Then the left we will create a static AU also and one dynamic AU also. Both AU will be created. So what is the main difference between them? That is a manual one. Okay, this is a manual AU. Okay, and this is the automated AU. As here we are adding a query. Based on that query it will work. Here we need to do a manual addition and deletion. So this is the main difference between that. Okay, and we will check how we can be able to use PowerShell for that, and how we can be able to create the with the help of Graph API in our lab. Okay, so these are the step. We does not need to go with this step. We will, when we will create the AU, we will check these steps. Limitation and consideration, this is the biggest thing that we need to keep in our mind. So no testing capabilities. You cannot be able to nest the AUs. Like AU cannot be nested with one another operating as a flat structure. Contrast with Active Directories, OUs require careful design of the AU structures. Like you cannot be able to nest, as we have discussed it. This is the one AU, this is another AU. You cannot be able to add both the AUs and to the same AU. So that you need to keep in mind. Okay, this has not been worked. Group membership scope, when group is being added to a AU, privilege applies to the group itself, not users. Okay, administrators can manage group properties. To manage individual, they must be added directly. So if you, for example, you have created a AU, okay, under that AU you have given a user as a group administrator. Okay, another GA we have, but here the GA is not a global administrator. Here we have a group administrator. Okay, so group administrator we have given, he could be only able to manage the groups that is being added in this AU. Okay, not the users. Like he cannot be able to add the users, he cannot be able to remove the users. He can only be able to manage the groups, as he doesn't has user administrator. Okay, so he can only be able to manage the groups. Okay, so that's why if group membership scope, he administrator can manage group properties. To manage individuals, they need it added to it directly. Means users should be added directly to this AU, not through the groups. Okay, moving forward, dynamic membership contracts. Dynamic AU has a specific limitation. Single object type can only be include users or device. Okay, for example, if a member type is user or device, only a single object type will be added. Each members required a Microsoft Entra ID P1 license. Okay, so for dynamic, yeah, we knows it could be group, it could be AU. It will require a P1 license. Okay, not in the tenant. Like we have two type of license in the tenant, right? We have discussed it. One is on the tenant end, like if you have license on the tenant side and tenant wide, sorry, that is a P1 and P2. And if you have the same license for particular users also, so per user license will be required for dynamic memberships. Okay, assignment requirement, specific license for administrative unit, AU administrative unit, Entra ID P1 P2 or free, it will work for, but for dynamic membership it will be needed P1 or P2 per user. Here you can see AU administrative unit, it will require Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2. That means it is for tenant, not for per user. For dynamic, that will be required per user, means each user should have P1 or P2, any one of else. Okay, understood. Moving forward, so this is some best practice that we have. Delegation method planning, like design AU structure to align the organization needs. Start simple and expand as required. Government defaults, means first time if you are creating the AU, just keep it simple. Use it with your department only. Like if you are from cloud or if you are from technical support, then just create the AU for your department and just try to work on that particular AU. So you will have some basic understanding on that AU, then you can be able to increase it. So that will be a simple and best approach for you. Name and convention, always use a name and convention in AU. For example, if you are creating for any of the department, then proceed with IT, then the purpose or the role that you are going to provide for that particular AU, then move forward with the name of that AU. Okay, but if same as if you're creating for BU, then use a finance underscore that name of that particular role, and then the group name. Then if you are creating for a region wise, like country wise, so for example India, then IND, then moving forward with the underscore, then if you are going for a department and department name, otherwise you can move with the role name and then move forward with the name of that particular group. So use something like that, so you could be able to manage, or you can be able to remember that for which role of his, for which department we have created this AU. Automation: use dynamic AU to minimize manual overhead. Leverage PowerShell for the bulk operation. So you can use PowerShell or Graph API for bulk operations, and use dynamic AUs to minimize your manual stuff. That will be able to uh, give you an automation that automatically user can be able to add over there. Okay, but for this, per user P1 or P2 has been required. Troubleshooting: membership not updating, that these things we will be just go and check the details on the left side. Dynamic rule error: create a test dynamic rule, validate the syntax. Yes, these are the basic steps that we need to follow. And role assignment: confirm role assignment AU, scope not just tenant. Check AU is a restricted management AU. So if you are not able to add the users in the particular AU, then confirm your role, or check if it is a restricted AU. If it is a restricted one, then nobody can be able to add from the tenant wise. Only the users who have permissions under that particular AU can be able to add or modify the users over there. Okay, so this is the overview of administrative unit that we have discussed today. Hope this brief knowledge of AU will help you to identify or to work on the AUs on your labs. In the next video, we will go and we will create some AU and just play with that particular administrative units that we have in our Intra. Okay, till the time, learn well, do some testing, do some R&Ds, and if you have any issues, just comment us, drop us an email. Please like, subscribe this video so we can create you, and if anything improvement is being needed, just drop and comment. We will help, we will try to improve it. Okay, thank you very much. Please like, share and subscribe our video. Thank you.